Hello students, welcome back. Today we are going to continue our chapter number 5, that is growing plants, and the topic which we are going to discuss is pollination and fertilization. In this video we will talk about pollination and then we will discuss about fertilization. As we have seen that many insects or bees it flies around the flower or go to the flower in the search of nectar. So what happens during that process when an insect sits on the flower, some of its pollen grains sticks to it. जैसे ये insect बैठा है, the pollen grain will be sticking to it. The insect carry the pollen grains to the stigma of another flower or of the same kind. Then this insect will fly and then will go and sit on the another flower. And then what will happen? In that formation, the pollen grains will be transferred from one flower to the another flower. And this process of transferring of pollen grains from stamen to the stigma is known as pollination. Here you can see a bird, a butterfly. First, it is sitting on flower number 1 and then flying and then again going to flower number 2. So in this process, what is happening? The pollens of this flower is being pollinated with the flower number 2. So this process is known as cross pollination. This when the pollen grains of this flower go to the same flower, then that is known as self pollination. But what happens when the pollen grains of this flower is being transferred to the another flower, then that is known as cross pollination. So basically there are two types of pollination. Self pollination जो एक flower के अंदर ही होता है and cross pollination which happens between two flowers. So let us understand this process of pollination properly. What happens in pollination is an insect which comes around the flower, and then we all know that anther, pollen and stigma, that is a part of flower which is always there, it goes in the need of nectar. After that what happens? That flower or that bee, it's not necessary that it is again going on the same flower. वो क्या होगा? वो दूसरे फ्लावर पे भी चला जाएगा. तो क्या हो जाएगा? It will be totally covered with the nectars, है ना? वो पूरा नेक्टर और pollen grain क्या होगा? पूरे उसके बॉडी में क्या हो जाएगी? लगी रहेगी. Like this, here you can see this bee. Its body is completely covered with yellow powder. You can see that is pollen grains. And when this bee will go and sit on the stigma of another flower, तो क्या होगा? This pollen will be transferred to the stigma. So this male egg will be transferred to the female part, and then what will be happening? Fertilization will happen. So the transfer of this pollen grains to the stigma is known as pollination. Once again I am repeating, the transfer of this pollen grains to the stigma is known as pollination. Now let us talk about fertilization. The pollen grains grows a tube that moves from the stigma through the style. Now here you can see and reaches to the ovary. The pollen grains fuses with the ovules to form seed. This process of pollination getting fused with the ovule is known as fertilization. Now here, please see this picture. Here, what is happening is like how a pollen grains coming from outside, this is small pollen, it comes to the stigma, this is known as pollination, and then the cell, the pollen grains are being transferred to the ovary through the style, है ना? Style के through ये transfer होता है ovary में, and then this ovary fertilization, and in this ovary fertilization takes place and eggs बनता है, इसको हम लोग eggs भी बोलते हैं. If you remember, I have explained. Then what happens? It is fertilized and it develops into seed like this. This is how the seed is being developed. Then the ovary develops into fruit, and then ovary develops into a very beautiful fruit. So this is how fertilization happens. Let's try to understand it with a very good video. Like this is the stamen, the male part, and it consists of a long stalk called filament and a swollen head called anther. This is the anther, and anther consists very small pollens, and this pollen is numerous in number, and they are the male reproductive cell. This you can see, this is the male reproductive cell. और ये एक नहीं होता, ये बहुत सारा होता है. It is millions in numbers, है ना, बहुत सारा होता है, एक के ऊपर बहुत सारा. So इसी तरह से क्या होता है, बहुत सारा grains होता है. And this is the pistil. Pistil consists of sticky structure called stigma. That top stigma, it is sticky, चिपचिपा होता है. And then there is style, and then the down the bottom, the bulky part, that is the ovary. That is the ovary. So what happens here? In this ovary, the egg is being formed. इसी के अंदर क्या होता है? Formation of egg take place. Now how does it take place? That also we will see, है ना? The swollen end is known as ovary, और इस ovary के अंदर हमारा क्या होता है? Eggs होता है. Ovary contains the female reproductive cells called ovules. Now what happens? The pollen grains, it comes through the stigma and moves to the ovary. Pollen grains come through the stigma and moves to the ovary like this. See how the pollens are flying, and then it is moving towards the ovary. This process of pollens joining with the ovules present in ovary is called fertilization. Again I am repeating, the process of pollens being joined with the ovules present in the ovary is called fertilization. So this is how fertilization happens. Once again, let me just show you properly what happens actually. Here, the seed is also being formed. Like here. The pollen flies and then it goes. And then here you see seed बनता है, ovule बनता है. Like this you can see ovule and then seed, and then slowly this seed we find in the fruit. यही seed हम लोगों को कहाँ देखने को मिलता है? Fruit में. After fertilization, ovary swells into fruit. So this is how fertilization takes place, and this is how the process of pollen grains fusing with the ovules is known as fertilization. So I hope, my dear students, the topic of fertilization and pollination would be clear to you all. Thank you, my dear children. Thank you very much.